Have you ever thought how to speed up your IT career? Have you ever thought why some engineers, architects, leaders, and scientists are more successful than others? My name is Łukasz Karwacki and I love asking questions. I invited here many industry experts with different backgrounds and point of views. This is Engineering Growth Club podcast. Welcome on board. Hi, and very warm welcome to our special guest today, Sandra Namatovu, experienced data and IT recruiter. Hi Sandra, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Lucas. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm really excited to this interview because I hope you will reveal a lot of IT recruitment secrets.
I hope so too.
Okay, let's warm up first. Just the first question. How much time do you have for a CV?
So, the main reason that a lot of hiring managers choose to work with a recruiter like myself is to save time. The market at the moment is candidate heavy. So, I would say typically for a job advert that I post, I receive anywhere from 10 to 50 applicants a day. So I don't have much time to look through a CV. So I would say, in general, I spend no longer than 40 seconds looking through a CV when it comes through my inbox.
Okay, this is actually what gossip says, that the recruiter has only 30-40 seconds. So it's really true. So you mentioned that the managers want to save time and the market at the moment is candidate heavy. Okay, this is the autumn of 2020, just to make sure if someone is listening this later. So this means that there are more candidates on the market at the moment than roles are available. Is it right thinking?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. In particular, because of COVID, naturally, a lot of companies have had to pause on hiring, or in some cases, they've gone bust and they don't have a role there anymore. So, because of that, the candidate to role ratio is a lot higher than ever before. But I must mention, even before COVID was the case, the data and analytics market was leaning to candidate heavy. And that's just because of how new it is. And there's not as many people that have had the time to develop skills.
Oh, okay. It's very interesting. So this 30-40 second rule sounds like you mentioned 10 to 50 applicants per day. This means that you browse like 30-40 CVs daily.
That's correct. And in some cases, a lot more. And I've just trained myself over the years to know what I'm looking for and spot it very quickly. And I'm sure a lot of hiring managers or anyone that's had to recruit for their team or any team has developed the same sense of being able to spot what you're looking for in a CV very quickly.
Okay, so I will go for this. What are you looking for in a CV?
Yeah, good question. So I personally like to work backwards. So I'll go right to the bottom or the top of the CV and start from the person's education. I'm looking to see what they studied, where they studied it, for how long they studied it. And then I want to see what their career path has been like from that point. So some of the things that I look out for is, firstly, that there are no career gaps between roles on their CV. And even if there is a gap between a role, say if somebody was traveling or they were on secondment or they were out of work due to illness, that has been stated in the CV. It's much better to see that explanation than let the imagination wander as to what that person was doing during that period of time. I also look at the duration of time that a person has spent in a role. I would say the average, a good amount of time is anywhere between 18 months to 4, 5, 6 years. Anything less than that time, I understand that in some cases it's not people's faults that they haven't spent a lot of time at a company, but anything less than that time gives the impression that a person would move roles quickly and doesn't bring much confidence to the hiring manager. And anything more than that time gives the impression that the person hasn't experienced different working environments and different types of data and different tools, etc. So that's why the tenure that they've spent at a company is important. I also look for, when it comes to the contents of what they're writing about in their CV, I want to know in a really simple yet concise way what their responsibilities were, the tools they used, and how they used those tools. For example, I used Python to interrogate and manipulate data sets, and I used Power BI to visualize those data sets. The reason that's important is I see a lot of CVs where they list the tools in a separate section. But as you know, with Python, for example, it's a universal tool that can be used for many different things. So it's important to understand how you're using Python to know whether you'd be relevant for this role. Finally, I'm looking for the types of companies that they've worked at. I'd say right now in the market, it's broken into 3 areas. You get the type of company that are very corporate, and I would say a lot of financial services and the big management consultancies fall into this bracket. And I would go for somebody that's worked at one of those companies if my client is more of a regulated client that wants somebody that's used to working in those environments and maybe has an understanding of GDPR or working with data where there's high compliance, etc. And the second group is your retail companies and insurance companies, for example, that are very customer focused. So you know when this person's worked at that company, the type of data that they've probably worked with is very commercial and customer centric. Again, aim for those types of people if I was looking for a client like that. And then finally, and I'd say the most popular type of company at the moment are the unicorn tech startup types of company. And the main reason is hiring managers like those types of people because they're not just a data engineer when they're in that type of company. They're normally a data engineer and a DevOps and a data architect. So they tend to have a broader skill set. So yeah, those are the things that I'm looking for in a CV when I'm doing that quick scan of it.
So let's try to summarize this answer, quite long and good answer. Okay, so you look for first, education is the first thing which make you interested in the person. You check what they studied and how long and what kind of university, I guess. And you look for career path. I would have the question here. So do candidates need to have like focused career path, or more acceptable are people who are trying different career paths? How does it work here?
That's a really good question. I would say the candidates that I've seen that are more successful have chosen a career path and stuck to it. You can have slight variances, i.e., going from a data analyst to an insight analyst, for example. But somebody that, for example, goes from a credit risk modeler to a data engineer to a data analyst to a solution architect, sort of jack of all trades, master of none in that situation. So I would say it's more impressive to hiring managers if you've had one career path. And on that note, something else that managers are looking for is career progression as well. And so my advice to people is if you've been in a company for 5, 6 years and you've not had that promotion that you can put on your CV, it's a good time to then look for new opportunities, because it is something that people and future employers are looking at when they're thinking of hiring you as well.
Okay, so this means that if someone stuck for 4 or 5 years on the same role, the future potential hiring managers would have doubts regarding their skills or attitude, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. You mentioned something that you look for career gaps and they look pretty bad in the CV, but it's very unlikely that people state it on the CV. And you said that it's good to have something written in the CV. Okay, I was traveling like around the world for a year in 2016, because it makes you more confident that this person is more suitable and is not hiding anything.
That's correct. The hiring managers are human too. And as well as your skill set, people want to hire credible and trustworthy people. And you putting everything regarding your career journey on your CV helps to enable that feeling of trust. You have nothing to hide, and you're happy to speak about the parts where you were in employment and the parts where you had gaps too.
So our advice for this, if you have a gap, don't be shy, show off.
Yes.
Write it down, yeah, tell the reason, what's happened. You will be more trustworthy because you're transparent, your communication is transparent. And this means that your mindset can be the same at work. If something goes wrong and you've got project gaps,
Yeah.
for example, you will more likely to communicate directly to the manager. Yeah, all right, okay, I understand. About duration, it was a very interesting part of the answer that this is something what is acceptable. The employment time is between 18 months till 4 or 5 years. What's happened if it's less than 18 months when you see this kind of candidate?
Yeah, of course. And I've had many situations where there's been a really strong candidate, but they have 5 or 6 roles, say, on their CV. And at each company, they were there for only 9 months or 8 months or even 12 months, but never longer. And I've had managers say, no, thank you, we would not like to speak to this person.
What did you ask, or did they inform you why they don't want to talk to this kind of individual?
Yes. So when managers are thinking of bringing people on board, of course, they want the person to have the skill set that they can utilize straight away, but they're also looking at this person as a potential investment. And the idea that they have is that they're going to train up and develop this person to be even better than they are being hired at. And so, because of all of that investment they're going to put into a person, they want that feeling that that person wants to have a long career at the company, not that they're going to leave it, in a couple of months.
Yeah. I understand. So if they hire people, they invest money and they develop to make them more skilled, and they are not able to trust because they've seen a couple of short-term employments in their CV. Of course, it's a different situation. We've got a serial contractor who takes short-term contracts. Of course, yeah, it's not the case. We are talking now about permanent roles, yeah. So that's obvious, because if you're a contractor, the market is a bit different, and there are other assumptions.
That's right. And yes, just to reiterate your point, the contract market is a completely different market. What I would advise, though, I've seen more success with contractors when they decide to contract on an area that they're a subject matter expert a bit later on in their career. So if you are starting off in your career, I think it's best to go permanent to get that training development investment that a company will give you, and then you can contract a bit later and really get good money for the skills that you possess.
Actually, this is very good advice for our audience. Okay, if you want to contract, don't take a first job as your contract, but just gain some technical knowledge and some people skills, and then later move on to contracting roles. That's great takeaway. Okay, but let's get back to the duration. Like you said, something till over. What's happened after 5 years if the hiring managers are not happy to hire people who stayed in the same role for more than 5 years? What's going on with this?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. And I remember when I first learned about this, I was surprised myself. It's not that somebody that's been at a company for 5 years or more is less attractive, especially if, for example, they have shown on their CV that they have constantly been progressing within roles at the company. That's a really good asset. The only problem is when it starts edging towards 10 years at the same company, managers get nervous about how a person will adapt to a completely new environment. And that's from stakeholder interaction to working on different types of projects, using different tools in a different way, looking at data in a different way. And so they're just a bit more reluctant to put those people through because of that fear.
Okay, so this means there are two things about if you're working longer than 5 years for a big company. First, if you're in the same role that you are not progressing with the career, potential hiring managers are in fear that you might not be able to adapt to their business or to their new environment they offer to a candidate. But if an individual is progressing inside the company with career different roles, going up on the career ladder, that's absolutely fine because it shows something like, I think, mindset or it's a result of something, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, this is good to know. I was thinking about this before, and it's a good insight that how hiring managers see like potential employees or team members. You were talking about you were looking for what they writing in their CV, and like in IT or data or tech industry, people usually list thousands of tools they are mastering, more or less. But you said that you want to see what was their responsibility in the role and what was the context of usage of the tools. Like Python was the best example because Python can do everything.
Yes, yes. I would say the best way to write your CV, in a sense, is if you were trying to explain to a C-level stakeholder what it is you do, what your responsibilities are. And imagine this C-level stakeholder also wanted to know what tools you're using and what you're using them for. And so with that, you have to go in enough detail so that it's credible, but it can't be too complicated that the C-level stakeholder, as a non-technical person, couldn't understand it. And I think that's the best balance that I see in CVs, where they have the job title and the bullet points following that explain the responsibilities that they've had and the tools that they've used. Some people even go as far as to add the commercial value that they've contributed.
And how does it look like on CV?
So, for example, they would say, I worked on a project where we had to monetize a certain product and used Python to manipulate the data, etc., and visualized or created dashboards that were presented to the C-level stakeholders, saving the business £2 million. That was a very rough example, but that's just an example where somebody has shown me the commercial value that they add to their company.
So that means that adding a commercial value they added to the company is pretty good sign for the hiring manager, I guess.
Definitely. Right now, the people that are assigning budgets for these roles to get hired, when the hiring managers are going to those people to pitch why I need a data engineer or a data scientist or a data analyst in my team, they're saying it's because it will bring this commercial value to the business. And so when you are able to show the manager on your CV that you bring commercial value to a business, the two just join and it makes it a lot more appealing to give you a call or give you the job.
It looks like there's also, if you are able to state on your CV what commercial or business value you bring in to the company, this means that you understand the business you're working for. So I think it's a great asset to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is another takeaway. You mentioned something about C-level stakeholders, which was actually surprising for me, because I thought that C-level stakeholders are not really involved in the recruitment process.
So what we are finding more and more is that they are becoming involved right at the end, final stages. And I think it's a change in the attitude to data within the industry. I think a few years ago, it was something that the IT department dealt with, basically. And so the hiring managers of the IT department would hire their data people and deal with it. And maybe the manager of the IT department would be involved with the C-level stakeholder. But more and more, we're finding that the C-level stakeholders are really interested in what the company is doing with data. And we're finding that data is becoming more of a central part of the business. And because of that, C-level stakeholders are getting more involved in the interview process. We'll go on to talk about the types of things that managers say in interviews and how to prepare, etc. But I would say that when a C-level stakeholder, in my experience, has got involved in the interview process at the end, they're asking more business questions versus technical questions.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so recruitment process is usually about questions. So we are calling the candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you looking for in the conversation, or what kind of questions do you ask?
Yeah, great question. So I purposely start the call very open, and I'll ask a question such as, what are your responsibilities at the moment? The reason I do this is because hiring managers would like us to not ask leading questions. And when I say leading questions, I mean questions like, do you use Power BI to create visualizations? Because naturally somebody will say, yes, I do, because they want the role, even if they don't.
Yeah, of course.
And hiring managers will get annoyed at me if I put them through with that being the case. So asking an open question means that the candidate's more likely to talk about the skills that they're most confident with. And based off of that, I can understand which role of mine they'd be best for. The other reason I ask the open question is I want to see how they talk about the way that they work. So again, similar to the CV, I want them to be able to explain to me in a really easy to understand way the tools they use, the type of data they work on, and the result of the work that they do.
Okay, so you are looking in the call for signs of a candidate is a good communicator, and they can simplify and describe what they do on daily basis in just kind of very easy or very digestible language or something like that. I understand.
That's right. Another thing that I'm looking out for when I'm speaking to a candidate is something that a lot more managers are asking for at the moment, and it's a sense of culture fit. And
Okay, it sounds interesting.
yeah, so when I say culture fit, I'd say the word that I've heard managers use with me is approachability. They sound friendly, pleasant, welcoming, warm. Those are just some of the describing words that I would use. But somebody that you feel that you'd want to speak to and that you feel that you could ask questions. So sometimes, for example, if I'm speaking to somebody that's very technical, they may mention a tool or way of working that I've not come across. And so I'll ask them, what does that do? I haven't come across that. And I'll be analysing the way that they then explain to me.
Oh, that's very interesting. Just going back to this whole conversation. You said about responsibilities, simple language, what they really do at this job, or what they did do the previous job.
Yeah.
And never ask leading questions. Always ask open questions, because if you are asking leading questions, you suggest actually proper answer, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let's get back to the second part of this conversation next week. Thank you.
Thanks so much for speaking with me. And yeah, I hope that those tips were useful for anyone listening.
And there is something else. Remember to follow the podcast so you won't miss next episode. Cheers. Music by Stella Ronson.